The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning, and welcome to today's hearing entitled National Science Foundation, Part 2, Future Opportunities and Challenges for Science. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. For nearly 70 years, the National Science Foundation has served a mission that made the United States a world leader in science and innovation. The key question before us today, how can NSF keep us and continue to keep us at the forefront of science and innovation for the next 70 years? Today we will hear perspectives on how NSF can meet the challenges and opportunities of the future and ideas for ways that NSF can improve. We will examine particular challenges such as setting priorities during a time of budgetary constraints and ensuring that all taxpayer-funded research is a high quality, reproducible, and conducted with integrity. We will also look at the vast opportunities created by technology, which allows science to be more accessible and has created more data than ever before. I look forward to hearing how we can make science more open and harness that data to solve real-world problems. There are also great opportunities for innovation where science disciplines intersect. How can we encourage more transdisciplinary approaches to solving some of our toughest challenges, from cybersecurity to traumatic brain injuries, or Alzheimer's, diabetes, and so many more issues that we know you're addressing and that we've addressed here in the committee and elsewhere throughout Congress. But the best breakthroughs come when we break down those silos. Finally, we have a great opportunity and challenge to develop a new generation of STEM workers. A study by Georgetown projects 2.4 million job openings in STEM through 2018, where Virginia will lead the nation with 8.2% of its jobs being STEM-related. By 2018, there are projections that Virginia will need to fill 400,004 STEM jobs. These are good-paying jobs, and we need to prepare students to fill them. And I'm happy to say that we have a Dominion student here from Virginia today at our hearing who's shadowing us today here to hear from our great witnesses. So this is the second of two hearings the Research and Technology Subcommittee is holding on the National Science Foundation this month to provide input into a reauthorization of NSF later this year. The first hearing, held on March 9th with Director Franz Cordova, covered issues addressed in the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act, including accountability and transparency, large facility construction management reform, research misconduct, and STEM education coordination. I should actually emphasize it was preventing the research misconduct there, and we were addressing that. The AICA, signed into law in January, demonstrates that there is a strong bipartisan commitment on both sides of the aisle to the mission of NSF and to supporting basic and fundamental research. I hope this committee can continue to work together on making sure we maintain our nation's leadership in science. Innovation is about seeking new methods, new ideas, and new breakthroughs. We want to make sure that the way we fund, support, and conduct science is as innovative as the research it produces. And with that, I look forward to hearing the testimony of our guests. And I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, for holding this hearing on the future opportunities and challenges for science. I also want to thank our panel for being here this morning to inform our discussion on the important issues facing the U.S. scientific community. As a scientist, I chose to be on the Science Committee, and this subcommittee in particular, because the key role I'd be able to play with my colleagues in promoting and overseeing the National Science Foundation, the world's foremost facilitator of top-quality scientific research. As chair and now ranking member of the subcommittee for more than 8 years, I'm proud of what I've been able to help the foundation, how I've been able to help the foundation fulfill its critical mission. All of us in this room want to maximize the benefits that we can reap from federal investments in science, but we sometimes differ on the best way to do this. Some believe that federal investments in particular fields of research are a frivolous use of taxpayer dollars, and that funding for these projects would be better utilized in other areas of research. I believe that there's unambiguous evidence to the contrary, and that NSF investments across all fields of science and engineering have yielded tremendous societal benefits over the past 70 years. I want to say a few words about a primary target for some criticism: research funded through the NSF's Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, or SBE Directorate. I've heard the arguments that, in the wake of proposed cuts to the SBE Directorate, if social and behavioral science research adds value to an interdisciplinary initiative, cybersecurity, for example, the other NSF directorates participating in initiatives could fund the SBE element of the project. There are a number of problems with this approach. First, program officers face strong competition for research funding within their own directorates and are thus very reluctant to divert funding from their own field to researchers in another field. Second, NSF currently only supports the highest quality SBE research, guided by the expertise of the scientists in the SBE Directorate, many of them supported directly by the SBE budget. If SBE research were to be supported only as an add-on to other projects, the quality of the research would inevitably suffer. And as an engineering program officer, no matter how good they are in their field, cannot be expected to have the expertise to assess the social science component of a proposal. I also want to point out that SBE funding accounts for only 4.5% of the total NSF research budget, or $272 million out of over $6 billion. When I was a political scientist, I was one of the strongest proponents of interdisciplinary research. I believe that fields of study were oftentimes too siloed. But I also understood that groundbreaking interdisciplinary research required that those involved in that research needed to bring the best expertise in their own fields to the table. If SBE funding is gutted, progress in social sciences will slow, and its community of experts will shrink, along with its capacity to add value to other research initiatives. As a result, in the long term, America's capabilities in cybersecurity, medicine, military planning, disaster preparedness and aid, and countless other fields will suffer. For interdisciplinary research to be transformative, the core research it draws from must be strong. The evidence bears out that unfettered research driven by key questions and approaches within a discipline that is carried out across all fields of science and engineering serves as the best foundation for discoveries and technological innovations. This is the philosophy the NSF has followed and has produced outstanding benefits for our economic and national security. Perhaps more important, it is that unfettered ability to pursue the best and most compelling ideas that attracts and nurtures our nation's and the world's greatest scientific talent and keeps them here on our own shores, contributing to our nation and developing the next generation of American STEM talent. If we start to suffer the brain drain that other countries such as the UK and Germany suffered in decades past, we may never fully recover. We can all agree that we want to maximize the return on federal investment in science, and there are ways of doing this that we can agree on. Is it important to ensure that research is reproducible and conducted with integrity? We can make certain that data obtained from federally funded research is made available to other scientists and to the public. And we can encourage interdisciplinary collaboration while maintaining support for core research. While Congress should set priorities for our investments in science, it does not have to be at the expense of scientific inquiry or the viability of entire research disciplines. Madam Chairwoman, before I yield back, I want to ask unanimous consent to put in the record a document the majority and minority staff received yesterday from the NSF Inspector General, Allison Lerner, in regard to the number of incidents of research and misconduct over the past 12 years.
So directed?
And if the chairman would
Without objection. Sorry.
Thank you. And if allow me to go on for another minute.
Sure.
Just want to talk a little bit about this, what I just inserted for the record. In her testimony before the committee 2 weeks ago, Ms. Lerner stated that there were 175 cases of research misconduct reported in the OIG semi-annual reports over the last 4 years. Immediately after the hearing, she notified the staff that she had erred in her testimony and there were only 75. At the same hearing, she testified that there had been a significant increase in a number of substantial allegations of research misconduct in recent years. Committee staff followed up the same day by asking her for the data, and yesterday she shared a 12-year history of allegations, investigations, and findings of research misconduct at NSF. When you look at the data, you will notice two striking things. First, it would be very hard to discern any clear trend over the last decade, let alone a significant increase. Second, looking just at fabrication and falsification, which are arguably much worse than plagiarism, and what the AIG claims to have been referring to in her testimony, you will see an average of 12 OIG investigations per year for the past 12 years, 15 cases per year if you look just in the last 5 years. When it comes to actual agency findings of misconduct, the average is 2.6 per year over 12 years and 3.2 over the last 5 years. It's important to point out that these numbers apply to all NSF proposals, not just funded grants. NSF receives 50,000 grant proposals per year. 15 cases of substantive allegations of research misconduct represents 0.03% of all these proposals. 3.2 findings of research misconduct per year represents 0.0064% of all proposals. Research misconduct is a very serious issue, but I think it's important to keep these numbers in mind. I look forward to discussing all these issues. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chairman Smith has a schedule conflict this morning, so we have a statement for the record to submit on his behalf. And I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee for a statement, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I want to thank the chairman and ranking member Lipinski for holding this hearing, and welcome to our very distinguished panel of witnesses. I believe that the stated purpose of this hearing is something we can all support. The process for setting research priorities at the National Science Foundation has always been a combination of science-driven and policy-driven, or bottoms-up and top-down. The Congress does have a role to play. Reproducibility is a well-documented challenge across all STEM fields, and one for which this committee can help promote progress. Research misconduct is a rare exception. Nevertheless, we should remain vigilant and promote good policies, including education and training, to minimize misconduct everywhere. I strongly support open science and data sharing. For the last two Congresses, I co-sponsored the Public Access to Public Science Act with Representative Senator Brenner. To this date, we have been unable to convince the chairman to take it up in the committee, but I hope that we will continue to look forward to considering it. Along with every other Science Committee Democrat, I also co-sponsored with Representative Tonko's Scientific Integrity Act that promotes open science and data sharing while protecting privacy and confidentiality. I encourage the chairman to take that bill up as well. However, data sharing is never as simple as it sounds, and our witnesses will help shed some light on the complexity. While the core STEM disciplines remain essential, many scientific frontiers are at the boundaries between disciplines. We must continue to look for policies and funding incentives to promote transdisciplinary research. National Science Foundation has come a long ways just in the last decade. However, unhelpful stovepipes between disciplines remain, especially at our research institutions. Finally, there are a few topics that I'm more passionate about than developing a new generation of STEM workers. Of all these topics, I have no doubt that the experts sitting before us today have many wise recommendations based on many decades of collective experience. Those of us sitting on this side of the dais would be most wise to heed the recommendations. For example, I'm quite confident that none of these witnesses will endorse slashing funding for the geosciences or social and behavioral sciences in order to increase funding for other fields. I also doubt that any of these witnesses confuse research reproducibility with research misconduct. Yet I often hear the rare cases of misconduct being used as a sledgehammer to impugn scientists broadly. We can set priorities and develop good science policies without stifling scientific inquiry or shutting down entire fields of research. If we truly care about developing a new generation of STEM workers, if we truly care about our nation's economic and national security, and if we truly care about the well-being of our children and grandchildren, we will listen to the experts before us today and the many other scientific leaders who have so thoughtfully developed recommendations for the future of the National Science Foundation and U.S. leadership in science and technology. I so look forward to the testimony from our panelists today, and I thank you, Madam Chair, and yield back.
Thank you. I'll now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Joan Ferrini-Mundy, Acting Chief Operating Officer of the National Science Foundation. Prior to this role, she served as Assistant Director of the NSF for Education and Human Resources since February 2011 and has been at NSF in various capacities since 2007. From 1999 to 2011, she held an appointment at Michigan State University, where she was a University Distinguished Professor of Mathematics Education. She was elected a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2011. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy holds a PhD in Mathematics Education from the University of New Hampshire, and she is a resident of the 10th District in Chantilly, and we welcome you here today. Dr. Maria Zuber, our second witness, is Chair of the National Science Board. In 2013, Dr. Zuber was appointed Vice President for Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she oversees more than a dozen interdisciplinary research laboratories and centers. Dr. Zuber was awarded the NASA Distinguished Public Service Medal in 2004, and in 2008, she was named to the U.S. News list of America's Best Leaders. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Astronomy from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a Master of Science and PhD, both in geophysics from Brown University. Dr. Jeffrey Spies is our third witness, and he's co-founder and Chief Technology Officer for the Center for Open Science and Assistant Professor at the University of Virginia. Dr. Spies was recently named an Association for Psychological Science Rising Star for early career scientists whose work has already advanced the field and signals great potential for continued contributions. He completed his undergraduate work at the University of Notre Dame, where he also earned his master's degree in psychology and computer science. He also holds a PhD in quantitative psychology from the University of Virginia. Dr. Keith Yamamoto is our fourth witness, and he's Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Francisco, where he joined the faculty in 1976. He chairs the Coalition for the Life Sciences and sits on the National Academy of Medicine Executive Committee, the National Academy of Sciences Division of Earth and Life Studies Advisory Committee, and the Executive Committee of Research America. He is also an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He received a Bachelor of Science from Iowa State University and a PhD from Princeton University. I now recognize Dr. Ferrini-Mundy for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Ranking Member Johnson, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Joan Ferrini-Mundy, and I am the National Science Foundation Acting Chief Operating Officer. Previously, I served as the NSF Assistant Director for Education and Human Resources. Before coming to the National Science Foundation, I was a professor of mathematics and education and an administrator at Michigan State University. I appreciate the opportunity to testify as the Foundation celebrates nearly 7 decades of funding scientific discoveries. The mission of NSF is to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. I will highlight 4 features of NSF's approach to enacting the mission that have served science and the nation well since our beginnings: fundamental research, flexibility, partnerships, and people. For nearly 70 years, NSF has focused on investing in fundamental research across all fields of science and engineering. When grants for fundamental research are made, it is often impossible to immediately see what the direct impact on society will be. Yet NSF investments have benefited the lives and livelihoods of generations of Americans. NSF investments drive U.S. economic growth, strengthen our nation's security, and give the country the competitive edge we need to exert our global leadership. A second hallmark of NSF's approach is maintaining the flexibility to fund the very best scientific ideas from wherever they may come. This means having evolving mechanisms for investing in ideas and solutions that span existing and established scientific fields and lead to new ones, that cross disciplinary boundaries, and that are high risk with potential for high reward. Our gold standard merit review process ensures a fair and expert hearing for each of those ideas. Flexible collaborations across our disciplinary directorates ensure that we are able to make awards for the very most promising ideas. Third, I wish to highlight the centrality of partnerships in NSF's effectiveness. We partner across government, with the U.S. and international scientific community, and with the private sector. Through the NSF Organic Act of 1950, the Foundation is established as a partnership between the National Science Board and the National Science Foundation Director. Our nation's most distinguished and respected researchers prepare decadal surveys and synthesis reports for the National Academies of Science. The pool of nearly 50,000 NSF proposals received annually and the reviews that we obtain for them from partners in the scientific community provide a rich snapshot of the directions and trends of U.S. science and engineering. The private sector relies on the steady stream of basic science that fuels their efforts at innovation and enhances their efficiency and productivity. NSF promotes the growing emphasis on open science through its policies for sharing publications and managing data. Finally, and I know of great importance to this subcommittee, are people. Government, universities, colleges, businesses, and industries all depend upon a steady supply of well-prepared people in science and engineering, drawing on talent from across the diversity of our nation. All should have the opportunity to be inspired by the wonders of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics through learning opportunities in K-12 schools, community colleges, universities, as well as in informal, self-directed, and lifelong learning environments. NSF has a unique role to play to nurture the next generation of STEM talent. That generation will carry the mantle of discovery and innovation into the future. NSF looks forward to its continuing responsibility for advancing the frontiers of discovery, innovation, and learning. I thank this subcommittee for your support of the Foundation. This concludes my oral testimony. More detail on the 4 points I have briefly highlighted today can be found in my written statement. I will be pleased to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. And I now recognize Dr. Zuber.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much. Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the chance to speak with you on challenges and future opportunities for science. I would also like to acknowledge Chairman Smith in absentia and Ranking Member Johnson. In 1945, after radar and the atomic bomb changed the course of World War II, Vannevar Bush outlined a vision for the future. In Science, the Endless Frontier, he wrote, "Scientific progress is one essential key to our security as a nation, to our better health, to more jobs, to a higher standard of living, and to our cultural progress." Bush's vision resulted in the National Science Foundation. For nearly 70 years, NSF has trained scientists and catalyzed discoveries in all fields of science and engineering. Our unwavering commitment to promoting the progress of science has opened new windows on the universe, made possible new industries, and improved the lives of all Americans. NSF investments have given us the internet, touchscreen technologies, and better natural disaster warning systems. These discoveries have put millions of Americans to work and improved our nation's prosperity and security. The question before us is, will the world's richest, most powerful nation continue to invest in our future? Do we still want to be the first to know, to understand, to discover, to invent? The board is fully aware of these challenges. Budget constraints, questions about priorities and the role of government, and of course, growing competition. Our government plays a unique role as a supporter of basic research. The private sector will not, cannot, invest large sums in open questions for 20+ years, as we did for the LIGO gravitational wave detector, for example. The discoveries of the past 70 years were made possible by Congress, presidential administrations, and the research community working together with a common purpose. We cannot allow today's challenges to unravel the partnerships that have supported NSF's core mission and benefited our country. I offer 3 suggestions for how to move ahead. First, maintain the federal government's unique investment in discovery research across all fields of science and engineering. Second, prepare a STEM-capable workforce so that all Americans can participate in and benefit from scientific progress. And third, for the research community, maintain the trust and confidence of the American public. One of the board's key responsibilities is to help NSF realize its vision. The foundation must continue to push the frontiers of science, investing wisely without fear of failure. This means, in part, identifying and setting priorities that will serve our long-term national interest. NSF has not picked winners and losers or determined in advance what discoveries will emerge in a project or even a field of science. Instead, NSF must continue to take advantage of the creativity and ingenuity of the best minds in America to drive science progress and let discovery be our guide. While the education and training of scientists and engineers remains at the heart of NSF's mission, to secure our future, we need a STEM-capable U.S. workforce at all educational levels. On the farm, the factory floor, the laboratory, and everywhere in between, workers are using STEM capabilities to innovate, adapt, install, and debug. This workforce must include women, underrepresented minorities, and blue-collar workers who have been hard hit by automation and globalization. NSF is realizing this future through its unique integration of basic research and education and through its investments in fundamental research into STEM. Investing in people not only ensures that all Americans have the tools to thrive, but it also guarantees that U.S. businesses will have the talent necessary to compete in a global economy. Finally, the scientific community must do its part. We must be champions of transparency. Our processes, institutions, and the conduct of research itself must be unassailable. We must work together to stamp out fraud, be forthright about the limits of our knowledge, and hold ourselves to our highest ideals. We must publish our data and describe our methods clearly so our peers can critique our results. For NSF, this means ensuring the integrity of merit review, advancing the best ideas, and promoting the progress of science in a way that is transparent, accountable, and can be understood and appreciated by taxpayers. As this committee has recognized throughout its history, promoting the progress of science is essential to America's future. We look forward to working with you toward a reauthorization of NSF that empowers the nation's scientists to explore those endless frontiers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zuber. And now we'll hear from Dr. Spies.
Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and Ranking Member Johnson, other members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer of the Center for Open Science, a nonprofit technology company missioned to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scholarly research. NSF has had a tremendous record of success by trusting sound scientific process. My recommendations today are in service of making an already efficient process work better. To be clear, the issues I will describe are not the same as headline-grabbing cases of fraud or misconduct, which are relatively rare. Science doesn't have an honesty problem. It has a communication problem. Scientific results gain credibility by demonstrating that evidence can be independently reproduced. This means that someone else can obtain similar evidence with the same data or with the same methodology. Reproducibility requires that the process used to obtain a result is described in sufficient detail. But science is complex. Brief descriptions of scientific papers cannot provide enough detail to capture the nuance necessary to facilitate reproducibility. We need to fall back on two simple concepts that everyone learned in elementary school. Show your work and share. If as much of the scientific process is open as is reasonably possible, the materials, methods, data, software, analyses, then replication can occur more easily, more frequently, and with greater efficacy. Openness should be the default for scientific communication, but currently it is not. The reward system in science is built around publishing. Getting published, however, has very little to do with research being reproducible. It has to do with novel results and clean narratives. But science is often messy and ambiguous, and if we hide the messiness away, we hamper scientific progress. We need to show our work, and we need to share. These same solutions can also prevent and correct those rare cases of misconduct. And even when we can't show all of our work, for example, when data must be kept private, there are still incremental steps that can increase credibility. Openness has another benefit. If paired with outreach and education, individuals who would otherwise not be able to participate in science would now be able to do so. And because these individuals are likely to be from groups typically underrepresented in science, we would see greater efficiency not only from an increased number of contributors, but from the benefits that diversity brings to collaboration and innovation. NSF has already taken steps to encourage openness. In my written testimony submitted for the record, I detail recommendations to expand upon that process. These fall into 5 categories. First, meta-science. NSF could fund investigations of reproducibility and reproducible practices. Second, infrastructure. NSF could fund technology that could, for example, facilitate open, reproducible practices or enable the analysis of data that must remain private. Third, training. NSF could add reproducibility training to its research fellowships and traineeships. Fourth, incentives. NSF could encourage the release of preprints for rapid dissemination of research. It could also fund pilots like registered reports, where publication and award are based upon the importance of the research question and quality of the methodology rather than the outcome. And fifth, community. NSF could convene stakeholders to discuss and adopt guidelines that would increase the pace of change. The scientific process that continuously improves our current understanding of the world is itself continuously improving. Critique and new evidence lead towards understanding. When we invest in NSF, we are investing in this process. And when we invest in openness and reproducibility, we are making the path towards understanding easier to navigate. This path leads us incrementally towards the next innovation that will increase the quality of life here and abroad. I would like to see us get there as quickly as possible, and I believe that an increased focus on openness and reproducibility will do just that. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
And now we will hear from Dr. Yamamoto.
I am Keith Yamamoto, Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy and a molecular biologist researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss with you today 2 topics important for consideration of the future of NSF. First, the opportunities, imperatives, and barriers to achieving transdisciplinary science. And second, the wisdom and perils of prioritizing research around scientific or societal needs and challenges. First, transdisciplinary science, which is virtually a merger of the physical and natural sciences, engineering, and computation, as distinct from interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary interaction or cooperation between distinct endeavors. Reports from the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences call for the construction of a computational knowledge network that detects the relationships between different concepts, data, and technologies, enabling assembly of transdisciplinary teams, each team member with different specialized expertise working together to tackle difficult, important problems. Importantly, the role and need for specialization is maintained, but a general transdisciplinary literacy would fuel network approaches to solving problems that are invisible or intractable within siloed disciplines. Transdisciplinary teams would elevate the risk profile of academic research and increase the number of spectacular, unexpected advances. Of the 25 or so federal agencies that currently support scientific research, NSF is the best situated to establish transdisciplinarity, thanks to Vannevar Bush, who we heard about before, who proposed creation of the NSF in his remarkable report, Science to the Endless Frontier. He proposed the NSF as the sole federal agency to support all U.S. basic research and education programs. It is wholly probable, he said, that progress in the treatment of refractory diseases will be made in subjects unrelated to those diseases, perhaps in chemistry or physics. Support of all basic research and advanced science education should be centered in one agency because separation of the sciences in more than one agency would retard scientific knowledge as a whole. While Bush lost the battle for a single basic science agency, today's NSF is divided into 7 disciplinary directorates that cover much of the scientific landscape necessary for today's and tomorrow's research and education. However, bureaucratic and fiscal silo walls establish intellectual silos as well, inhibiting effective transdisciplinarity. To achieve transdisciplinary research and education, actions are needed both within and outside of NSF. Within NSF, I suggest creation of a new organizational layer that floats above the directorates and are sectored into big idea or big challenge research programs that cross directorate boundaries. The directorates would retain most of the funds to be awarded, let's say 90%, with the remainder transferred to the idea or challenge programs, which would oversee the peer review process and supplement awards to transdisciplinary projects. In effect, returning funds to directorates that choose to co-host transdisciplinary teams. Education programs would continue to emphasize specialized expertise, but would additionally build transdisciplinary literacy to motivate team-based research. Outside of NSF, the OSTP, for example, might be charged with framing a few societal grand challenges with funding to incentivize multiple federal agencies to develop joint programs that leverage their particular strengths and resources. This would begin to address current inefficiencies, fragmentation, and competition between federal agencies. My second topic examines prioritization of NSF research around scientific or societal needs and challenges. Despite Vannevar Bush's passionate prioritization of curiosity-driven basic research, careful development of NSF grand challenges, or big ideas, is justified by the urgency to address certain societal needs and by the imperatives of social justice to correct disparities in access to social services. Well-enunciated grand challenges will broaden the minds of those who participate and will broaden the tent to attract new participants. Imagination will still rule. The scale and scope of the challenges will determine if they best reside within NSF or rather merit attention and support across multiple agency boundaries. In conclusion, NSF meets its mandate to support a broad spectrum of basic research. However, the well-justified organizational boundaries that separate its directorates create barriers to achieving transdisciplinary science. Novel organizational approaches should be considered both within NSF and between agencies to lower those barriers. Finally, NSF can stay true to its mission to support basic discovery and even improve upon it by careful framing of support programs in the context of big ideas and grand challenges. This concludes my testimony. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you all, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I appreciate the 3 guidelines, Dr. Zuber, that you laid out. Maintain the investment, and I know we're not addressing the budget at all today, but I can say for myself, and probably a few others here, we are very interested in maintaining that budget. And so while we're seeing discussion of cuts elsewhere, I think this is a very important time, and and very important work that we need to maintain that type of investment. And of course, the STEM-capable workforce that you mentioned is another important area to both create that pipeline, but then also make sure those kids know that we're going to maintain the investment, so this is going to be a continued career for us. And then thirdly, maintaining the trust and confidence of the public, which you've all addressed today. And so I wanted to focus a little bit on that transdisciplinary approach and how we are going to take advantage of sort of this opportunity that I think we have now, where you have the private sector very interested in investment, you need to maintain the public investment, and how are we best going to maximize both? And I want to emphasize that anything private is not a substitute for the public, because we still need that basic research, and much of the private can often be maybe a little bit more risk-taking. And I often hear that in talking to people who are interested in the private research, that they realize they are going to have opportunities that are a little riskier or a little more outside the box than by nature some of the public research. But I wanted to follow up with Dr. Yamamoto. What has been your experience when sort of taking outside the box ideas to the National Science Foundation, and how can we make that easier for them, and what guidelines might be the best to adjust, or how do we best make that work?
Right. So let me start by saying that I think that NSF is, as an agency, quite welcoming to broad-based ideas. But as I said, the barriers that are intrinsic to bureaucratic separation of the directorates in this case are problematic. And my own experience in carrying some big transdisciplinary ideas and approaches to the NSF was sort of met with being handed an org chart of NSF and said, you know, go out and shop your idea around the separate directorates. There's not a home for, an intrinsic home for these big kind of ideas. So my idea would really be to create such a home, to be welcoming of those kinds of approaches for every grant application that's made, that currently, that when they cross those boundaries, struggle to find a natural home, and may struggle in peer review as well for that reason. And so I think that is the kind of thing that is necessary. I might say that this idea of kind of a programmatic focus that floats over the boundaries that separate disciplinary approaches is basically the way that we've organized the research approaches at UCSF, where we have conventional departments like every other institution that are separated by these disciplinary approaches. And then floating over those are research programs that really have a big say about how resources are deployed, how we reach into the different departments and bring together investigators that can merge their skills and really go after problems that otherwise would not be solvable or even detectable by individual researchers. So this is an idea in a way that has been tested, and I think would help to address this challenge and opportunity for transdisciplinarity.
Right. Thank you. And Dr. Spies, could you address how, when we have more openness and we get that, how that both helps the public research as well as the private, and how that might help us maximize the value in both areas, as well as make for more usable data and information, and how you would see that working in an ideal situation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In an open framework, we think about knowledge as a public good, and therefore its accessibility and the credibility that openness brings to it is available to anyone. Obviously, we need to facilitate that sometimes, but that basic accessibility is still there. We've heard many examples of what has come out of the NSF from a basic science standpoint. And so if we can increase the quality of that and increase the efficiency of that work, the work that comes out of this basic science programs, we can see then these end users receiving those benefits. They'll see the same efficiency gains. They'll see the lower risk, perhaps, because the quality would have been increased.
And is there maybe, in terms of the community, is there some of the fear, as you're talking about, that everybody makes mistakes? We were talking about, we find problems and things, but is there sort of a cultural fear of having that out there instead of sort of understanding, well, let's have a whole bigger community that's finding those mistakes sooner that we all make and sharing it in a way that helps for collaboration? I'm thinking, Thomas Edison obviously had to go through a lot of experiments before things get right. If he was sharing this in a bigger community, it might have all happened faster, right? Not that you don't want to, when you have your research, you want to maybe keep that to yourself too, I understand, but do we have a culture in the scientific community that makes it sort of punishing to have that information out there and shared?
This is certainly a cultural issue, and I don't know if it's necessarily punishing, but we don't really allow discourse around failure. Peer review happens after the work has been done, and so there's really very little influence that can have because you already did the work, and so it's a cultural issue, and so the perhaps fear. I think is across any area. No one wants to make mistakes, and no one wants to be seen for these mistakes. But we need to embrace them. That's a critical role in science. It's a very important part of the scientific process.
Okay, and I know I'm over my time, but if our other witnesses had anything to comment in that area, just wanted to give you an opportunity to.
So I would just say that in science, if you make a mistake, it's okay, but it's better if you correct the mistake yourself than have somebody else correct the mistake. So I think we ought to incentivize a system where mistakes within groups are that it's recognized in a positive way. So.
I would just add, and perhaps we'll have more time to talk about this later, that issues of open science and the ways in which sharing can happen in very different ways across different scientific fields. And so learning across fields, in fields like astronomy, for example, where public data has been a norm for so long, we have a lot to learn about how mistakes are determined and how we can share and accelerate findings. So there's a lot on this topic that's of great interest to us at NSF.
Great. Thank you. And I now recognize Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to start with Dr. Spies. I want to applaud your work on making data more open. We know there are issues around that sometimes there's reasons why there have to be some data cannot just be all put out there directly as it is. But some have proposed that government agencies should only be allowed to make regulations based on studies that have posted all their data online. But in practice, this would make the majority of available research off limits to government agencies. Are there ways the government can increase the openness of the research it relies on without undermining its ability to use all the available science?
Yeah, there are many cases where we simply can't be completely open with work with respect to data privacy, security, or even just proprietary advantage. Some people need to maintain that intellectual property. But there are many ways that you can still be open, you can still be transparent, and really gaining that efficiency, credibility, and accessibility by taking certain steps. It's not an all or nothing thing. For example, with data privacy, there's a concept called secure computing, where the data can remain private, but you can still analyze it. Other people can still analyze that, but the data is never made fully available. Or you could release your methods and materials. So keep the data private, but release everything else around it. And this adds to the credibility. It might not add to the accessibility of that data, but you can still have a credible experience. You can still allow people to come into that and audit that process if need be. So we can still gain that credibility that we need in science.
Thank you. I want to move on. I want to ask Dr. Yamamoto, can you just briefly say what is the difference in your mind between interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research?
Sure. Transdisciplinary research really attempts to merge the sciences. I think we have an opportunity to do that now. It's quite remarkable, in which the concepts, the driving concepts that are at the basis of different disciplines are applied and used to move forward other disciplines that haven't had those concepts before, or approaches. And
okay, I come back to you. I just want to make sure we had that out there, because I had
Right.
that question. I just want to make sure I understood that that's what it was. I want to ask Dr. Ferrini-Mundy. A few years ago, there was there were funds that were set up to fund, I guess, interdisciplinary research at NSF, and that no longer is there. What happened with that? How did that go?
So I think you may be referring to our Inspire program.
Yes.
That ran as a pilot. One thing that we're finding now at NSF over time is that our work across the directorates is just as prevalent for us as our work within directorates. And so we have already initiated a number of efforts at NSF that are transdisciplinary as well as interdisciplinary, new language that is in the same family as convergence research that brings together experts from multiple fields. And so I would put examples on the table. Our innovations at the nexus of food, energy, and water systems is one of the initiatives that we started that was meant to draw in scientists from multiple fields to solve challenging problems. Understanding the brain is another, risk and resilience is yet another, NSF includes is another. So what we've been moving toward are a variety of efforts that signal our serious commitment to promoting science that cuts across disciplines in various ways. We also do have a follow-up within our sort of options for continuing to propose interdisciplinary research that occurs, and it's called RAISE. It's an interdisciplinary program that has some of the same elements as Inspire had. It's a way that people who bring an idea that doesn't squarely fit a particular discipline can at least follow a set of steps to bring that idea to the foundation. But what we are seeing in our efforts is a lot of interest that spans directorates, a lot of partnerships among directorates to encourage this kind of research.
And Dr. Yamamoto, do you think that this, you had talked about some things that you would like to see. Is there anything else that you believe NSF could do better in order to encourage this type of research?
I think what NSF is doing is quite good. I think that my concern is that we're missing opportunities because programs, investigators, teams of investigators that come to the NSF with ideas that cross disciplinary boundaries are sort of viewed as a secondary case, not a secondary citizens, but secondary case in which they really need to go out and find a home. And what I would suggest is that NSF recognize this opportunity for transdisciplinarity by setting itself up to welcome and support every application that comes forward in this mode, to ask where's the best ways, what are the directors that can best support this kind of approach that's being brought forward to us, so that it's not a special case, that every case that comes forward recognizes that we have an opportunity to use transdisciplinarity, and that it's not something that's new or separate.
Thank you. Yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Hultgren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate your work, and also appreciate you coming here testifying today. This is a very important subject to me, I think for all of us, but I'm grateful Being from Illinois, the great ecosystem of science that we enjoy in Illinois, some wonderful universities, our great laboratories, the cooperation that we see between them, mutual benefit. And so with all of that, I think there's a reason why Illinois is well represented on this committee. I've got some great members that we really enjoy working together, getting good things done in science in Illinois. One thing that has been important to me is access for researchers to the most advanced scientific infrastructures at facilities such as Blue Water's supercomputer at the University of Illinois. I've also had the opportunity to tour Stampede down in Texas last year. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, if I could address my questions to you, how does NSF look at the capabilities of a tool like Blue Waters when taking into account the different kinds of questions researchers are asking? Many researchers have described to me the issues with data management being more important than just raw speed for certain types of problems. Does NSF need to have differing capabilities in computing infrastructure? And how does NSF plan to address any type of gap when one of these tools goes offline?
Great. Thank you for your question, sir. NSF, through its Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, supports the development, acquisition, and provision of state-of-the-art cyber infrastructure resources, as you know. Those include tools and services, and they focus both on the high-performance computing capabilities, such as those at Blue Waters, that are essential to the advancement of science and engineering research, as well as, so we call that leadership computing. Those are the unique services and resources to advance the most computationally intensive work, such as what is carried out at Blue Waters. We also focus on what we call innovative high-performance computing resources. So these are a set of diverse, highly usable resources at large scale. The work at Stampede that you mentioned is in that category. So regarding Blue Waters, it's not appropriate for me to comment here on any future solicitations or investments, but we are mindful of the importance of avoiding gaps in our leadership computing services. I also would point to a recent National Academy study titled Future Directions for NSF Advanced Computing Infrastructure that has a number of recommendations, one of which is that NSF should provide one or more systems for applications that require a large, single, tightly coupled parallel computer. And we certainly take the strategic advice of the community very seriously.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, I'm going to continue with you, if that's all right, but switching gears a little bit. The average age for a first-time principal investigator for NIH-funded research has risen to 43 years of age. Albert Einstein, as we know, was in his 20s when he presented his theory of relativity. He was 46 when he won the Nobel Prize. An average age of 43 for a first-time PI seems to miss the most creative and productive years in a scientist's career. Wondered, do you know the average age of a scientist receiving their first regular NSF grant?
So thank you for the question. We actually do not request information about age or date of birth in our applications, and we do make an optional checkbox for people to indicate the date of their degree. So we can speak in terms of date of receipt of the PhD, in terms of age. And what we have seen is that, in general, the early career, which would be people who are 7 years or less from their PhD at the time of proposal action, the funding rate for our early career folks in comparison to those who are past that time, who are later, is quite close. Roughly 18% for our early career folks, 22% or thereabouts over the years for our people coming in from later careers. So that is, like 18% of the early career applicants are getting awards versus 22% of the later career applicants. In terms of the percentages, sort of how the balance of our portfolio looks, it's sort of about a 20-80 balance, with about 20% of the awards going to the early career PIs and about 80% going to those at later careers.
And would that be with regular awards, or is that special set-aside programs?
That's across the full spectrum of awards. We do have a wonderful program called the Faculty Early Career Award Program that is meant to bring people in within some number of years of their PhDs, and that's a really special program for us.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. I do think it's important for us to continue to discuss this, of making sure that we're maximizing opportunities to those who are younger, quickly after they've gotten their degree. Sounds like there's some steps there, but want to make sure that we keep that focus.
Oh.
So thank you. My time's expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Okay, and now recognize Ms. Esty.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski, and to our members of the panel for this very important hearing today. We had some discussion, some of us last week, at a briefing with NSF and the Department of Energy about the critical importance of infrastructure, the basic scientific infrastructure for attracting the best minds. There's been discussion, all of you to some extent are talking about the importance of supporting researchers, but encouraging and supporting that STEM workforce. So Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, could you talk a little bit about that? I look at the fact that, for example, the discussions we had about the Hadron Collider last week. I look at Yale University just outside my district and the work that's being done there on precision detectors and how that fits into these larger investments. Could you talk about that for a moment, please?
Sure, and there are so many factors that relate to these decisions. It's a lot about prioritization and how the National Science Foundation, in partnership, of course, with the scientific community, with the Congress, with the National Science Board, with the administration, how we actually set priorities, and it's an activity that's underway constantly with us. And one very strong commitment, of course, for the agency has been our investment in infrastructure over many decades through our major research equipment facilities construction account, where we are always looking at advice from the community. So decadal surveys are quite critical for us as we think about what next infrastructure is needed. But at the same time, we need to take some risks, and we've heard about LIGO, and we know that there will be some piece of that infrastructure investment that needs to be focused toward the high risk and potentially high reward investments that we can't predict where the science will take us. The other balancing piece in this business of prioritizing, of course, is in ensuring that we have the adequate resources to fund the basic research that occurs in that infrastructure. And so it's a constant calculation for us where we're considering lots of inputs and lots of factors, but suffice it to say we're certainly committed to our role with scientific infrastructure as we have been for so long.
Thank you, and I again want to underscore what many of you have talked about, and it has been a bit of a contention in the last few Congresses about whether Congress should be directing that research or not, and frankly, I think for the basic research, I would rather rely on scientists who have a better sense of where the science may be going, and my commitment to continue to support that. I know, in fact, many members of Congress tend to be science phobes. We may not be the best people to be directing that. That's not that we don't have an oversight role. Of course we do. But I think, as you've amply illustrated, that the U.S. has a leadership role in basic science, and we have to follow that where it takes us. You've all also mentioned the importance of interdisciplinary and interdirectorate work. So a quick answer, if people have ideas, are there things Congress should or could be doing that would incentivize or remove barriers for that interdirectorate work?
Well, the most important thing that Congress could do is not take steps to create additional silos, okay? And so by specifying funding in directorates, that of course creates silos. So.
Thank you, and again, that goes back to my earlier point about deferring somewhat to the scientific community to have the flexibility to move funding where the research takes us. Dr. Spies, you talked a little bit, actually quite a lot, about the incentives to share work. This is something we discussed a lot over the last Congress or two. Can you help us think a little bit about, and this is probably a subject for another hearing, this problem about publication and the incentives to publish something novel and not to share results that don't turn out in a novel way or that don't actually lead to something directly actionable, but in fact is really important for other people to know about because you may know this is not a profitable avenue. How do we square this right now? We have this problem about needing to publish to get research money, and yet if people are hiding their results because it doesn't seem actionable. It means you may have wasted money with a lot of people kind of following down that same path. Anyone have thoughts on that point?
Yeah, we have an incentives problem around publishing. And so we need to find a way to incentivize people to be more open, to take the risk, to be okay with failure, to put that out there and realize that that is adding to the corpus of knowledge. Any evidence is valuable in thinking about the science. And so there are ways to do this. And we really need to think more about this and test some of these things. The field of meta-science, we really need more of a commitment to that, to really understand what are the most efficacious ways to incentivize these things. Registered reports, I think, is a very good example, where we review the work based on impact of the questions and the soundness of the methodology. And then no matter what the outcome, you still get a publication. Scientists still get funding, they still get the publication, they still get that reward. And so they have no reason then to need to hide things or gloss over details to sell it to journals.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing that I'm over, but maybe we could have a hearing on this issue because I think it is really important and it's something we could contribute in the field right now because a lot of scientists are very frustrated with the imperative right now. So maybe we could ask the chairman and the ranking member to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now recognize Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Weber for 5 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Yamamoto, I had a question about one of the things you said. You talked about an additional organization layer, and we here in Congress are fantastic at doing that in government, and I'm just wondering, do you think does that add to maybe an inefficiency to it, or how do you, give me a little more explanation?
Sure. Yeah, the kind of the knee-jerk response to any additional bureaucratic layer is that it's going to slow things down or add complexity. The object of this additional layer is, in fact, to have research programs that float over the disciplinary directorates, and so that it crosses those boundaries in a natural way. And so that would be the idea of this additional layer, and that they would define the elements of the different directorates that would come into play to cooperate together to work in a given research programmatic area. So that's the object, is to undo the damage, the natural damage that bureaucratic boundaries do in setting up an organization that's necessary to have such separate entities. But anytime you do that, you've created a silo, and so this additional layer would float over those and cross those barriers.
So would it be more free-flowing?
That would be the idea, is that every grant application, for example, that would come into the NSF would flow first into these research areas, and that entity would then say, this is an opportunity to draw from these 2 or 3 or 4 directorates that can best come together to address this. So I would imagine, I would hope that downstream, what we would see increasingly is that teams of researchers composed of investigators with very different backgrounds and expertise would come to the NSF with ideas that definitely don't fit into any single directorate. But by going into this additional layer, they would always have a home, and that additional layer would then sort out which directorate would be able to contribute to that application.
Dr. Spies, thank you very much for that answer. Dr. Spies, matter of fact, I like what you had to say about an open process. We need some of that here too. But my question would be, would this open process add to or maybe remove from the subjectivity of the grants and resources and the distribution thereof?
Open scientific process is going to be adding to what we know about science. And so as much as the quality of that is increased, I would think that it would increase decision-making. Related to subjectivity, the scientific process doesn't care about outcome. It's not an important part of it. The outcome is what happens from the scientific process. And so if we focus more on the process, more on the workflow, more on these other components that lead us to these outcomes, which we as humans really appreciate, which you appreciate in making policy, but if we focus on that process, then we can have more objectivity, I think, just across the board. And so again, if that can aid decision-making, then it should do so with regards to that process, to those methods.
So you would believe that the better the process, the more perfect the outcome?
The better the process, the smoother the way towards understanding, whatever that is. I wouldn't say perfect. Science admits that it's never perfect. We are always incrementally moving forward. But process, good process, open process can make that a more efficient trek down that road.
Thank you very much. Are you back?
Thank you, and I now recognize Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. It's been a very good discussion, a kind of continuation of our earlier hearing. One of the things I wanted to follow up on, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, you talked a little bit about risk-taking, and that's something that we have to recognize as policymakers when I share the concerns raised by some of my colleagues about the problems of having members of Congress decide which directorates to fund in certain levels. Do we have oversight responsibilities, as Ms. Esty said? Of course, but making those decisions when we don't know what's going to be at the end of the research is something that we have to keep in mind as we're deciding funding. Can administration set priorities? Absolutely, but they shouldn't be at the risk of other areas. So I've enjoyed several times participating in the Golden Goose Awards, an event that the American Association for Advancement of Science, AAAS, has helped launch and organize each year to recognize the importance of federally funded basic scientific research. We don't know what discipline the next innovative transformative research will come from, but we know that NSF-supported basic research has led to advances in technology, in medicine, agriculture, and many more fields. Last year, one of the Golden Goose awardees was the Honeybee Algorithm. So in the late 1980s, several engineers collaborated with a bee researcher, and they studied how honeybee colonies allocate foragers. And years later, then, two researchers applied that honeybee foraging model to shared web hosting servers, something that wasn't thought of in the early 80s when they were doing the original modeling. And they their research resulted in an algorithm that speeds up the process every time we check our bank account balances, do an internet search, check the score of a March Madness game, which some people might be doing at this moment. So a question for all of the panelists, that the Honeybee algorithm is a great example of obscure or perhaps silly-sounding basic research that led later to technological advances. So what might be lost by withholding federal funding from research areas where we don't know what the benefits will be at the outset? We don't know where that research will go. So what are the problems? What do we lose by withholding funding because of that uncertainty or that risk? Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question and the great explanation of the Honeybee algorithm, very helpful. First of all, it needs to be, need to be clear that all at NSF take very, very seriously the responsibility of carefully investing taxpayer dollars and being prudent and responsible. At the same time, as you point out, it's very difficult to tell with certain basic research proposals what the long-term impact and payoff on the country, on our economy might actually be. And so we have so many wonderful examples. You've pointed out one, but there are wonderful boons to industry that started with no obvious commercial applications, and we have results about GPS, the internet, AI, and computers, where at any stage some of that basic funding in its proposal form might have not looked like it would lead to anything. So I think I certainly agree that we need to stay open. We need to use the expertise of the scientific community to select the 1 in 5 grants that we are able to fund, both for those that will continue to move science along incrementally as is needed, and for those that look like long shots but that have great promise in terms of their basic contribution. There's one other point I'd want to make on this, which has to do with choosing among areas of science. It's a tricky business because keeping the basic investment going in all areas of science, the fundamental research investment, is quite important so that there is this constant pipeline and flow of new ideas accumulating, new theories being developed, which may then find their use someplace else.
Terrific. I'm going to try to, thank you, I'm going to try to get in another question. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, the social, behavioral, economic sciences grants have funded groundbreaking research across the nation, including at Oregon State University, some important research on how communities and extreme weather events. If funding for the SBE grants at NSF were to be cut significantly, some are suggesting by 50%, this would also result in fewer SBE program officers within the agency. So given the breadth of research in the directorate currently, there could be gaps in expertise. So is that a reasonable assumption, and how might this affect the ability of the agency to review SBE grants for their merit or potential to benefit the nation? And maybe we can get Dr. Zuber in the last couple seconds as well.
So I just want to reiterate our central commitment to the importance of the social, behavioral, and economic sciences investments, the benefits coming that we have seen in cybersecurity, disaster preparedness, detecting reading problems early on. All of these span from fundamental research that would be missing if we were not able to invest in the ways that we do.
Yeah, and if I could just add, trying to think about research that actually serves the nation. A couple of things in SBE that facial recognition studies actually went into the analysis, the algorithmic analysis of identifying the marathon bombers in Boston. And another recent study of that violent extremism, the tendency to go into it, isn't just an economic thing, that there are actually moral imperatives. So if one is trying to dissuade young people from joining extreme groups, one needs to find a moral alternative. And another thing that I think is really the 800-pound gorilla is we need to think about jobs and job retraining. Right. And that is squarely a social science issue. And so I think at this time where we have so many issues in the country that really affect people, okay, that the social sciences really has an ever more important price to pay.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. And thank all of you for being here. This is the best part about being on the Science Committee is being able to talk to you. I wanted to pile on to Congressman Holtgren's comments about the age mix-max. I had some quick research. Albert Einstein was 27, 1906 in Bern, Switzerland, when he came out with Brownian motion, photoelectric effect, special relativity. Werner von Heisenberg was 26 when he articulated the uncertainty principle. Marie Curie was 30 when she discovered radioactivity. And I think I'm very grateful if you and Dr. Cordova would look at the 80-20 mix and figure out more to make it 20-80. It's sort of part of the, I'm not a mathematician, but I've heard again and again that there are very few genius mathematicians beyond age 30. Almost all prodigies are young. So, Dr.
Thank you so much. And I would just add, too, that we have a significant investment in young professionals through graduate student programs and through postdoctoral programs, too. So we really are working very hard to make sure that we keep that next generation ready and able to lead us in science in the future.
Great, thank you. Dr. Yamamoto, I'm going to pick on you because you're a professor of cellular and molecular pharmacology. And I love the physical sciences, particle physics and cosmology and relativity and biochemistry. But equally important are all these social sciences, the SPE that we've talked about. I'm especially thinking, Daniel Kahneman and his Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow has gotten so much attention about how we make decisions, which, given that we're here in U.S. Congress, is phenomenally important. Can you look at it as a biologist, chemist, physicist on what you think the importance of the social and behavioral sciences are?
I can approach this through an issue that's very important to me. I was involved in launching this notion of precision medicine. And precision medicine has at its heart an understanding of biological processes that is founded in understanding the mechanisms of the ways that these processes function. And so when you start thinking about disease, you come up right against the complexity of biological systems and realize that the Human Genome Project, for all of the things that it brought us, the genome is just one element that goes into the risk of an individual for getting a disease, the course of that disease when they get it, and so forth. And other elements, there are many other elements that come into play. Objective scientific elements like the small molecules that are in the bloodstream, the microbiome that inhabits all of us. But in addition, the impact of environmental factors, social and behavioral elements that very much contribute. So what precision medicine says is that we need to mount all of these layers of information in a Google Maps-like way that allows us to see correlations and connections that are otherwise invisible when the disciplines are maintained separately. And so if we can do that, build that Google Maps, and be able to establish what the links are between a given behavioral component or environmental component and what we see in a gene or a small molecule or a microbe that's inhabiting the organism, then we can begin to better understand what the various components that contribute to a biological process or a disease. So it's a long way of saying that I think it's really essential that as biological scientists that are sort of bound by collecting objective evidence, that these other components are just as important, and we need to really build that in. So it's great that the National Science Foundation understands that and has a directorate that really is focused in that way.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, very much. And Dr. Zuber, just a few seconds of building on that. Looking at psychology, especially as a so-called soft science, SBE, as chairman of the National Science Board, what's your perspective on the importance of investing in that for America's mental health?
So, so obviously it's crucially important, and NSF, of course, does the fundamental science, the basic science that then feeds into the more directed health-related work that's done at the NIH, okay? And there really is very good cross-agency discussions on these and other basic science / more disease-related problems. But I just wanted to make the point here that that we are on the verge of a real revolution in the social sciences. So right now, computation in the social sciences, high-performance computing they're using as much in those fields as math and physical sciences at NSF used 10 years ago, okay? So something that's considered a soft science is really becoming very data-driven, very quantitative, and it's, we're essentially at the beginning of a golden age here, so it would be a shame to cut it back.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I know Dr. Zuber and I had talked about young people yesterday and the importance of having them engaged, and I wanted to, in addition to having Eric Young here from Dominion High School, who is shadowing us here today, I know we had some other students here, but I wanted to just mention, because this was such an extraordinary young man who I was able to meet with yesterday. I think he's interested in the precision medicine area and has now been accepted at MIT, but has a few other options available. But let's see where he has. He just won. His name is Pratik Naidu, and I may not. It's Naidu if I'm not doing it justice. But he's a senior at Thomas Jefferson High School, and he was one of the 10 finalists in the Regeneron Science Talent Search, one of our nation's oldest and most prestigious science competitions for seniors in high school. And he created a machine learning software that can now examine how cancer genomes interact and help with new drug therapies. He was working with researchers up in Boston, so he was partnering with them from his high school up in Boston, so I'm sure they'll be thrilled if he goes to MIT and is up in that area. It was titled the DNA Looper, and this device can actually learn and give new insight in the ongoing search for cures for cancer. And then, just for an add-on, because he was such a charming young man, he happened to be an Eagle Scout in 8th grade, so clearly an overachiever here. And then also on the side, he had founded a reading group for veterans, and he called it the Classics Project, where he was studying classical war texts and how they relate to our current society. And he of course, he took Latin, so he was reading these, I guess, in the original, Homer's Odyssey, and then taking that and working with our veterans. So we do, I think that overlap kind of leads to the overlapping of how you have somebody like this who, whatever project he might come to in the future, we'll want to have some type of box to fit him in. But he clearly was a very talented young man here, so I think it kind of brings to life all the testimony that you all have given today. Dr. Yamamoto, if you'd like to.
I wonder if I could just comment on this age issue. I think it's terrific that NSF and NIH, other agencies, are building programs to single out for early investigators that are coming to these agencies for funding. But in my view, the heart of the problem is not that we're not giving enough grant support to young investigators, it's that they're getting to the system too late. The training is taking far too long, and I think that we need to go back and look at sort of first principles of what is needed for a PhD, for example, in the sciences. And there's a National Academy study that is just getting going. I'm on the committee to look at STEM graduate education. And see if we're really doing the right thing. That is, are we really providing students with what they need to then emerge as PhDs and go out and be successful? How important is the postdoctoral study period? What should be in that element, and how does it contribute or not? Are we just aging our trainees because we need them to be the workforce to do experiments in our laboratories, for example? And I think that going back and looking at those principles is really critical. In my view, we can shorten the training period a lot. And really, my own goal would be to say, can we develop a system that goes from the first day in graduate school to being independent investigators from what it is now to something in the 4 to 6 to 8 year range, from beginning graduate student to being an assistant professor applying for an NSF grant. And I think that that's a very doable thing. We've been remiss in not looking at those principles, and I think we've fallen into the trap of thinking that we need this mass of people to man our laboratories and carry out our experiments, rather than thinking about what is it that they need, when can they use their energy and creativity in the most efficient way.
Right. I think that was that ecosystem that you talked about creating, so it's very, thank you for that additional insight. And so we had 2 people come back, so we I guess recognize Ms. Rosen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Lipinski, and to our panel for being here today. And Dr. Yamamoto, my husband did his medical residency at UCSF along with many of his friends, and so we have a soft spot in our household for UCSF, and I thank you for all the work you do there and the kind of graduates I know you produce. So I'll just go to that. So I'd like to hear, I love my husband, so I have to put that plug in, right? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on several related topics on how we consider evaluating and funding scientific research. The value, of course, our basic research, core areas, and how they relate to our national interest, because oftentimes it's unclear. You know, I'm a former computer programmer, systems analyst who started writing software in the 1970s. No PCs, no cell phones. There's more right here than we could have ever imagined when I was at University of Minnesota writing on computer card decks in the basic lab in the math department, right? So we've come a long way, and we couldn't predict it. So we want to know, we want to be able to allow for these kinds of research that that we can't even imagine what's going through. So following up on Representative Bonamici's question, I'd like to ask you all, what is lost to the nation if we stop funding research in a whole discipline because somebody doesn't see the potential? If we stop funding core fields like biology, chemistry, or physics because we think all the discoveries have been made, which they have not, and like you go to the mistakes, a lot of mistakes turn out to be the foundation for something else in the future. And if we refuse to fund a field we've never heard of, that might be a key that unlocks mysteries that are yet untold. So the wholesale defunding of particular fields of science, is that really a wise way for us to go?
I think it's a disaster. I think that the existence of the National Science Foundation as proposed by Vannevar Bush really puts a stake in the ground for basic research where you actually don't know where it's going to lead. We are very far from, the amount that we don't know still so vastly outweighs what we do know, that stopping any of those investigations would mean that our future for being able to have knowledge that we can then apply will go away. And so we absolutely have to maintain this. I might just say one more thing about reproducibility that bears on your question, and that is that at least in the biological sciences, there's an element of reproducibility that hasn't been addressed here that I think bears mention, and that is that because of the past successes, we are now able to work in experimental systems, including populations of human beings, that are vastly more complex than we've been able to work on before. So the scientific ideal for planning an experiment is to control all the variables except the one you're trying to test, right? We're very far from that now. And it's good news that we understand enough to work on more complicated systems. But we need to acknowledge that when we do that when we control all the variables we can think of, underneath that is a vast number of variables that we don't know about, right? I call it the Rumsfeld effect, right? And acknowledging that says that an attempt to reproduce an experiment to get and ending up with a different result doesn't mean that either experiment was wrong. I have to point out that it doesn't mean that either experiment was right. And it simply means that the robustness of being able to reproduce it is not there. It very, very often is not there because there are unknown variables below what you've tested. So just to give you a silly example that I think makes it easy to understand is that no reviewer of a grant application or a finished product that is submitted to a journal for publication would say, oh, this looks really terrific. You've really carried out a beautiful set of experiments. Could you please go back and do them all again at 1/10 of a degree lower temperature?
Right.
Right. And that could be the variable that would change all the results and make two very solid attempts to reproduce a study come out with different results. And so remembering this is that we don't know about the robustness of a lot of these complex studies because of those unknown variables. And I think it calls into question, in a way, attempts to fund studies to simply try to reproduce complex results. Understanding robustness is critical, right? But being able to label something as right or wrong based on whether it's reproducible, I think, is problematic.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I thank you for what you're doing, especially in creating a quicker path for people in STEM, people like myself who started their career. It's so important that we build that people pipeline, create opportunities as early as possible in the youngest grades so people know it's creative and innovative and not boring in the least sense, and that they can all do it and not be science phobes, as someone else said. We need to generate that excitement. So I thank you for what you're trying to do with a lot of the programs you're working on. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I find this discussion very uplifting, especially in light of President Trump's budget presentation, which seems to disinvest in America, which is a troublesome notion. I'm concerned, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, that cuts to the geosciences could hurt our national security, our economic security, and our public health and safety. Are you aware of any NSF-funded research that came out of the Geosciences Directorate that produced valuable results?
Thank you for the question. And of course, the research that goes on in our Geosciences Directorate spans a very broad range of topics and areas. Fundamentally, we fund research that helps us better understand our planet. And so let me just give a couple of examples. We fund research to understand how the physical and chemical processes in the ocean and the atmosphere affect how ecosystems operate. And that not only brings us fundamental understanding of how heat redistribution happens, but it generates knowledge about marine ecosystems that ultimately can have applications about informed management of the fisheries industries, for example. Another area where we do terrestrial research has to do with knowledge generation that gets us understandings of groundwater and surface water systems that contribute to informed decisions about the use of water resources and therefore have implications for agriculture, potable water supplies, and recreations. Those are just a couple of areas where investment in the geosciences has affected our country in serious and important ways.
Thank you. And Dr. Zuber.
Yeah, since I'm in earth science, I can add a few things to this. So one example is the subsurface prospecting and the study of subsurface materials really has provided the scientific framework for hydraulic fracking, okay, which has brought this country really far in the direction of energy independence. And I will also add that NSF's Earth Science program also includes the space environment surrounding Earth. And so, for example, understanding solar storms and their effects on, if the GPS constellation goes out, if our cell phones go out, if the electric grid goes out, obviously that's bad for America, okay? And those studies are crucial in understanding that. Also, the health of the oceans, coastal erosion factors that affects so many people that live along our coasts. And finally, I would add that the GEO program supports the polar programs, including fully the Antarctic program.
Sounds like very valuable information that can guide us with some very important actions that we need to put into place. New York State has had a number of devastating natural disasters in recent years, including devastation from Superstorm Sandy, certainly Hurricane Irene, and Tropical Storm Lee. In New York's 20th district, my home district, we used to talk about storms that came once every 100 or once every 500 years. This type of talk is no more, with devastating weather events happening time and time again. I've sat with families who have lost everything and have witnessed the exorbitant costs that we are still trying to pay off from these extreme events. Extreme weather events are incredibly expensive to our communities and our nation. So my question to the panel is, does research in the geosciences help to ensure better predictions or better understanding of natural environmental hazards? Dr. Zuber?
Okay, well, the answer to that is yes. So actually, there are studies that are being done, and the state of prediction, near-term weather prediction, and extreme storms. That work is underway, and it's critically important, and we need to invest greater in it. There have been some studies done, and they need to be verified that as severe storms move up the East Coast, they typically go out to sea, okay? However, with the loss of sea ice, okay, over the Arctic Ocean, it changes the wind patterns so that there's a higher probability of a storm coming up the coast, not taking a right turn. And so one can just, envision what the economic consequences would be if we have more, Hurricane Sandys coming up and hitting the East Coast. And that's just a single example. Obviously, severe storms droughts and floods are devastating to the economy. And so this requires, it requires field work, it requires data collection, it requires greater investment in high-performance computing, and so it's really, really cross-disciplinary.
And I would hope it would instruct us in issues of climate change and, green gas emissions, so.
Well, certainly, but understanding weather on a short-term time scale is really fundamental in understanding if we're going to be able to extend those models to understand future climatic situations.
Dr. Zuber, I thank you, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And I thank today's witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. We really appreciate your insight and ideas, and I think we certainly have more food for thought for future hearings also, so thank you. And thank you for your good work in this arena. And the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members. So the hearing is now adjourned.